Okay, I'm here with the Utah's famous treasure hunter, author, researcher who's done one heck of a research on a lot of different subjects. And one subject that I am very interested in is throughout the country, I've turned up people that have found strange artifacts that shouldn't belong here, that come from the old world. And Dan, just so happens that Dan Lowe has done some research on that stuff, and he's got some views and information that I didn't even know about, some things that I didn't even know have been found about here. And so with that, Dan, take it away and tell me, why are these strange artifacts being found on this continent, and who brought them here and why?
Well, you got to start with what's bringing them all here, and we'll come around to that. But I would have to say that after the first original Americans arrived on this continent, the next group of people would have more than likely been from India. These people were encountered when King Solomon sent King Hiram, his friend, off to some place where he would return with shiploads of gold, ivory, monkeys, and it's always attributed to Africa. I think there's ample evidence that the place that King Hiram was going was right here.
In the Americas.
And I think this is what has started the repeated process of different cultures coming here, because that kind of information, if true, would have been shared with the royal families. And I think that's how it's distributed throughout the various cultures that come here, whether it's the Indo-Greeks, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Welsh. I think they're all coming for the same thing. We could sum it up with gold, but there's a certain place they seem to be getting to. If you look into the various stories, they always seem to be trying to get to this one particular locale, and I would dare say it's the mountains north of Lake Kapala.
So what cultures, what makes you think that they came here? What evidences do you have that they came here? And you've already said the why, looking for the riches that King Solomon knew about.
The evidences are many, and of course you'll always find the academic adversary in the majority of the stories, the discoveries, and so forth. For example, the Tucson Led Crosses. They would love to see that go away, but it's just not going to.
So tell me about for those that don't know about the Tucson Led Crosses, tell us about that, because I happen to know just a little bit about that. So
okay.
Tell us about the Tucson Led Crosses.
Good, maybe you can teach me something.
I doubt it, but I want to interject some stuff that I found out.
Okay, the Tucson Led Crosses, if I recall, were found in 1927, somewhere in there. I can't remember the guy's name. They were found, of course, down by Tucson. There were archaeologists involved, and the archaeologists that were there and participated in the excavation absolutely believed that they were authentic. They were dug out of caliche. And up to that point, the academics had always used caliche as the reason why something was ancient. But after this event, then suddenly it was, it's actually quite possible to create caliche in a very short period of time. And we see that a lot in discoveries. We see a lot of those who participated in these kind of things. No one contends against them as long as they're alive. The minute they die off, next thing you know, you got people coming out of the woodworks from the academic world trying to discredit that particular individual, whether it was an archaeologist, a geologist, or what have you. I wish I could remember the names of some very good examples of that. But the Tucson Led Crosses had Old Latin written on them. I think Cyclone Covey probably did one of the best cover stories for the whole thing in his book, and I think it's called Callalus. Can't remember the rest of the title. I think it was a Roman colony in America. But anybody that takes the time to go through the Old Latin that was written on the crosses, a story starts to come together. And if you have researched the various cultures that have been here, you start to see how they tie into the very people that they were speaking of in the Tucson crosses, such as the Welsh. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there that's heard about Prince Madoc coming here, and it's actually kind of a boring story for me because I know that Prince Madoc was simply following the trail of his grandfathers. That's just one of the things. There's been several Roman items that have been found.
So I want to go back to that, because
Okay.
like I said, I know a little bit about that because I got into, so not the original finder, but his partner, the original finder's partner, who helped dig up this stuff, who brought in the archaeologist, was Thomas Bent. And
Right.
they brought the archaeologists in. The archaeologists, like you said, dug these things out of Cliche. They made statements that these things, you know, were real. They dug them out of Cliche, you know. And then they sent some of these artifacts off to the Smithsonian so the Smithsonian could see them. And the Smithsonian said that they were a fraud. They weren't real. So then they said that they bored holes, made their own caliche mixture, and poured them in this, and it didn't take long for it to set up and look like it was real caliche. And then you said that the archaeologists eventually passed away. There was one guy, they did pass away, and there was one guy who became the head of the archaeology department of the Arizona University. I'm not sure which one. There's two.
Wake Forest University.
No, that's where Cyclone Covey was
Okay.
at. I don't know if it was ASU or University. I don't remember which. Anyways, the head archaeologist guy, he claimed that he was there and that it was all planted. He witnessed it and all that and. You know, so the thing is, well, if you witnessed this, then why did you not say anything? He was just a student at the time. He wasn't even there full time. He happened to be there a couple times. If he witnessed, why didn't he say? Why did he wait 50 years, 30 years to say this is all a fraud and coming out with his testimony that this is all a fraud? You know, when all these other guys had already produced documents saying that this was real, they dug it out. You know. And then in comes Cyclone Covey. He decides this looks real. He wants to get Wake Forest involved, do a dig on this. So he makes an agreement with the Bent family. The Bent family had they'd got control of the property. They owned the property.
Right.
They homesteaded it. They did something. Somehow they owned the property. So Cyclone Covey, he made an agreement with the Bent family. They was going in and doing some more excavation to see if they could find any more. Well, guess what? The Arizona College, whichever one, contacted Wakefield Forest College and told them they put a kibosh on it and they shut the whole thing down, so it never ever happened.
And it's still waiting for someone.
Still waiting
to pick up the project. Well, I had the fortune of talking to Cyclone Covey 2 months before his passing. You know, I usually miss out, or I go back and I look at when this individual passed away, and it's back when I was using dynamite to go fishing. When I was 17 or 18 years
that
old.
wasn't your pipe bomb I found in the river, was it?
It could have been. If it was metal, probably not. We used a lot of PVC. But yeah, I usually am not that lucky, but we talked for at least an hour, and very nice guy. And one of my main purposes was for calling him is I just wanted to hear his own words and possibly hear some of the things that weren't in the book. He also told me that feel free to reproduce his book if I wanted to, so I haven't done it, but there's always adversity that comes out on things like this, and I have to look at it, you know, because I want the truth, and I realize there's a possibility that things can be faked.
In all fairness, there is a lot of fraud out there, so it is tough to decide what is real and what is not, because there is a lot of fraud out there.
I've seen a number of frauds.
Me too.
And I had one guy sent me up a bunch of pictures of artifacts that were being found down in Tucson. And I got to admit, they looked good. They really looked good. I had to send them to a few friends of mine just to kind of get my ideas, or get their ideas, to help me formulate my opinion. But the primary thing that set me off on them is the alien thing.
I mean,
they were
artifacts
with aliens.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, one of these days I'll have to show you the photos. They're pretty good at what they do.
I got my own story about that, man. Yeah. I got a crazy story about that.
They're pretty good at what they do, but you know, you have to tap into your common sense if you have any, and you got to listen to both sides, and eventually you form an opinion and you become biased. And one of the things I always look for is when the academic cries out about a discovery and they're clearly putting way too much effort into it, and they wait until the individuals involved pass away, then they start writing their stories of fraud. And to me, that's a manifestation that it's a factual story. Why would you put so much time and effort into trying to discredit a fraud that no longer matters? Who cares? It was in 1927. I fail to see a motive in it. I don't ever recall anyone trying to sell it. Of course, the academics from time to time will come up with stories about, oh, so-and-so said that, you know, Mr. Bench was trying to negotiate a deal in purchasing these things, and you go look up that person, and oftentimes that person never existed. I mean, I'm a third-generation genealogist. It's not that difficult to look people up. Anyway, but the Tucson Led Crosses is just one of the many things. I mean, you've got the Roman armor that was found, actual scale armor. They call it scale mail, which is actually an oxymoron. It's either scale or it's mail armor. Can't be both. And there's been evidences of this scale armor that's been found up in New Mexico. There was a remarkable find that was down in Texas, and I'll send you the photos and you can insert them.
I know there was a Roman short sword found in Texas.
Well, the explanation that I read from the academics regarding the scale armor was that, and I couldn't help but bust into laughter, that the only reason that it was here is because some poor soldier couldn't afford his own new top-of-the-line armor, and so he took his family heirloom and brought it with him. That poor Spanish soldier, you know, can't stay up with the Joneses. Reminds me of high school. You had to have the You know, the brand name pants and the brand name shirts and shoes. And I thought all the Spanish soldiers were paid to come here and provided for.
You would think so, huh?
Yeah, I get some of the dumbest stories. I swear we could make some pretty comical books out of the things that are said in Wiki. Did you want to go over the cultures that I believe have been here?
Yeah.
And possibly what order?
Cultures, because I know what I've seen is like you said, the Romans, the Egyptians or the Orientals, what else is there?
Okay.
Tell me all the cultures and where they tell me the cultures and where the artifacts have been found to say that these cultures were there.
If there is any, there's always some evidence somewhere. I mean, there's so many books to go through. Books that were written as early as the 1500s, 1400s, 1600s, 1700s, and you know, I've got a collection of over 3,000 PDF books of, not all of them, but many of them are first accounts. People that first walked through a particular area and noticed the things that were there. First people to talk to the Indians. But I believe there was one incident prior to King Solomon, but I'm going to pass on that one. I think King Hiram was probably the first to come here after the original Americans landed on this continent. And we won't go into those time frames because I am a big skeptic when it comes to radiocarbon dating and the ridiculous dates they seem to come up with. And maybe someday we'll go further into that and I'll explain it. But I think the event that you read about in the Bible, first book Kings 1, I don't remember what chapter, I think it's the 10th chapter, the story about the Queen of Sheba. She was not from Africa, she was from India. I believe that the people that King Hiram ran into when he was here were the people of Sheba, or the children of Shem. In those days, they identified themselves according to the three sons of Noah, children of Ham, children of Shem, and the children of Japheth. And the only reason why they would have identified themselves as Shem Bala, children of Shem, is if they were living amongst one of the other children's descendants, such as the children of Japheth, which is basically the Asian people. The DNA clearly shows that the majority of the first Americans, or Indians if you will, the haplogroup A, B, C, or D, which every one of them is going to lead you right back to Altai, Mongolia. The events that occurred, I think, when Hiram came here and met with the servants of Sheba is the very reason why she planned a trip to go back to her homeland and travel northward up into Jerusalem, wherever it may have been, to meet with King Solomon himself. It's an interesting story about Sheba, but you got to read it. You got to pay attention to what's said, and you got to ask yourself why is this interjection regarding Hiram right in the middle of the story of the Queen of Sheba? I personally think, and I really don't care what anybody says, particularly the academics, but we can call the city of Shambhala a mythical city, or we can look at an alternative possibly, that the reason that they can't find Shambhala in the Tibetan mountains in the Himalayas is because they're looking on the wrong continent.
So you're saying that's here.
I believe it's here, and I believe I know
And so
where it
with
was.
what you said earlier, you believe that has to deal with Lake Kapala, with Kapala.
And no, I believe Shambhala is located down in the Yucatan. And that's a story in and of itself. But I think that's what eventually brought other cultures. Not long after King Hiram, this would mean that you had the original American first, which I believe are descendants of the Altai Mongolian, okay? Then you had the people from India, and I believe these were the people of the Queen of Sheba. Hiram came here. They didn't colonize, but they did come here. And he would leave over there, and he'd be gone for 3 years, and he'd bring back shipments. The alternative, or the adversity regarding it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that it was anywhere near Africa. I would have to say sometime around 600 BC, we had people come here who were of Hebrew descent. This is primarily out of the mouth of the Aztec, or should I say the Mayan, when they spoke of these people that arrived on their shores around 635 BC. It was probably another few hundred years after Alexander the Great when they conquered India. And as a result of conquering India, they get into their libraries. And I think this is where they got the information of this land that was across the sea. And I think that's what the cultures following were looking for. They wanted to find this place where King Solomon was going. And in a roundabout way, it was a best kept secret amongst the royal families. But from the time of King Solomon, clear up until 200 BC, there was a lot of these royal families that had lost the information or wasn't privy to it. But I think that's what spawned the Indo-Greeks coming here in about 100 BC. And they were here most likely up until about 400 AD. This would be the very beginning of the Roman Empire, or for those of you that know a little bit of your history, we've heard of the fall of the Roman Empire, or the Western Roman Empire. Of course, when you go and you read about the Western Roman Empire, they want you to believe that that involved France, Spain, etc. And I'm here to tell you this was the Western Roman Empire. The funny thing is that it rose again right about 775 AD, which is the same time frame that the Tucson Led Crosses explains that the Roman colonies came here. These Tucson Led Crosses, or the text within them, also tell of the previous culture, the Indo-Greeks, who were ran out of here. They came here as early as 100 BC, and indication is that they left sometime around 400 AD. I think they were run out by the people who would be considered the precursor to the Toltec. I didn't prepare myself for the evidences to show all of this, but it's scattered throughout the history. There are archaeological discoveries that have been made that supports this. There's so many different things. Geology, believe it or not, plays a big part in all of this. If you understand what happened at what time, geology can be very revealing. not only to discredit non-factual stories from the past, but also to provide some kind of validity. So now where are we at? We're with the Indo-Greeks, the Romans. Somewhere during the Roman times is when the Portuguese came. And, we also had Welsh, probably at first working in conjunction with the Roman colonies, but eventually separated. Sometime prior to that expedition of 775, when they came here to colonize, there's a certain character that I strongly believe, and I don't know why, because I really don't have anything to support it, but in studying my Welsh lineage, knowing that I am a direct descendant of a mythical king, King Arthur, I have always been fascinated with where this place is that he went, Avalon. And the explanations that are given by those in the academic world that want us to believe that Avalon was 50 miles across the sea to that island over there that you can see with your eyes from here. When they talk about going across the sea to claim your patrimony, I don't think I would have phrased it that way, unless, of course, it was across the sea, all the way over to this continent. What I find interesting, however, is this place that the Aztec talk about that they came from. And this is prior to going into the caves, the 7 caves, which, by the way, may very well be one large cave divided into 7 caves. The place they called Aztlan. And the place that King Arthur is said to have gone to was called Offlan, with an F. Because they didn't have a V in their alphabet, nor did they have a Z. And so how would one of these Welsh people have pronounced Aztlan? Is it a coincidence? I think they're one and the same places. I would also tend to believe that Aztlan, or Atlantis, T-I-S being the suffix, in other words, I am from Aztlan, I think they're one and the same. I don't think a big island just up and disappeared out in the middle of the ocean. I think that things changed enough to give it that appearance. So we may or may not have King Arthur coming here in 500 AD. And then the Romans, and then of course followed by the Spanish. Now, as far as evidences go, the expedition documents themselves is what really provides a lot for me regarding the Romans. And you can find it in Columbus's expedition documents. You can find it in, oh crud, now I can't remember the half of their names. The majority of the exploration documents from Columbus's time clear up until the 1800s, when you read through them, it's very clear they were following a very old path. It's very clear that Columbus knew exactly where he was going. And reading all of the references to Castilian this and Castilian that. We found Castilian walnuts over here. We found Castilian grapes along this trail. We found Castilian flax over here. Never do they say we found walnuts like Castilian. Okay? Could that have been a translation error? Doubtful. They knew the Castilian had been here prior. They still refer to themselves as Castilian, but the Castilian people actually pretty much came to an end in the 1300s. So there's too many inconsistencies if you just go read the exploration documents. You'd get a kick out of it. Did I leave anything out?
So, how do you tie that in, or how do you counter? What do you think about the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon and
Oh yeah, let's step back there. Okay. Everybody knows the story about G.E. Kincaid. Okay. I don't know what G.E. Kincaid did for a living. Oh yes, I do. He was a geologist. Okay. I don't think he would have known the difference between an Egyptian and a Tibetan or Buddhist or whatever. If you read the document, the original newspaper article, he said Egyptian-like.
Yeah.
And quite possibly Oriental. Mm-hmm. What validated it for me is when he describes this figure that is obviously Buddha. He even said a Buddha-like figure. Well, there's no such thing as a Buddha-like figure. It's either Buddha or it isn't. And when he's sitting there with his legs crossed, and he has that appearance of Buddha, and has the appearance of Oriental, with his hands open and a lily in each hand, that's Buddhists or Tibetan, okay? Hinduism. I think they give way too much credit to the Egyptians. You know, they talk about this wonderful city the Egyptians built. And the Egyptians didn't build those cities. They didn't build those pyramids. They were there before they got there. The Egyptians just simply moved in, kind of like the Aztec moved into those big caves that were already cut out and adorned with all these things that they found within. And those were built by the same people who belonged to the Queen of Sheba.
So back up here. What do you mean the Aztecs moved into this existing?
Into the caves.
What caves?
The seven caves. The caves they emerged from. The same caves that you hear the Zuni talk about, the Hopi, the Navajo, how they emerged from the underground.
Yeah.
That's the event they're referring to. We don't know exactly what the reason is that they left this place of Aztlan, but it was likely a massive earthquake that occurred in 900 AD, which is talked about in the Tucson Led Crosses. The Paiute also have a legend about it, and it seems to me there was one other source that talked about a large earthquake that occurred about that time.
So I thought the Aztecs left because it could have been an earthquake that caused this. The lake receded 3 times. Okay.
The reason in the Aztec record, no matter which one you read, that is given, actually there isn't a reason given. It just says they left in humility. Okay, why are you going to leave in humility? Because your big brother called you a poo-poo head? What? Why would they leave in humility? I think it had everything to do with their religious beliefs, and I believe that they felt they had fallen from the good graces of the gods. And I believe it might have been this big earthquake. I personally believe, even though the academic dates don't match, okay, but I understand certain events that occurred at that same time, I think this massive earthquake is the earthquake that's responsible for the Colorado Plateau uplift. And the area we know as the basin, where Duchesne is, and Roosevelt, and Vernal, I believe it was a near tropical environment.
Well, we know it was because they found tropical plants, alligators.
Oh, but those are billions of years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, And Lake Kapala was 33 million years old. Not. If that's true, and it was the event of the Colorado Plateau uplift, lava falls, done recent studies on that, and they've determined that that lava was running 1,000 years ago. You know, so we've got even supporting evidence from geologists. But where was I?
Lake Capala, the Aztecs, and the Uplift.
Sure confused me. Okay, the Colorado Plateau Uplift. I think what happened is it went from a near tropical environment with waters flowing from the tops of the mountains, source water being the underground rivers that nobody wants to admit exists, but they do. Occasionally they're forced to the surface, and I think in that earthquake they were caused to go underground. I also think the tilting of the earth and so forth is what caused the second event that literally carved out the Grand Canyon. If you remember right, Kincaid, he mentioned, I always wondered how he knew this, he mentioned that there were steps that were going up to the entrance where the river used to be. How did he know that? What event occurred from the time the Aztecs left those caves to G.E. Kincaid's time? What event took place that took the Grand Canyon down another 1,000 feet? And it was the draining of Lake Capala. And it was probably the event that occurred in 900 AD. Things slowly turned to high country desert. You know, the natives, they weren't stupid. They could see that, uh-oh, something's happened. You know, what'd we do wrong? They knew that they had a God. And they knew that if they did not do the things that their God wanted them to do, that there were various ways that they would be punished, and that was likely one of them. So that happens to match up with the approximate time frame in which the Aztecs left Aztlan in humility, okay? And they entered the caves. I think the caves were long abandoned, but they knew about them, and it was a place for them to go. According to the Aztec record, there were 7 tribes that went to these caves. 6 of those tribes stayed there for about 200 years. The Aztec, or the people who would become the Aztec, they stayed for dang near 300 years. And the Toltec, or the people who became the Toltec, they're talked about in the Tucson Led Crosses. And the time frames, everything fits, okay? And I guess what I could add to all of this is, if the Tucson Led Crosses were forged, who that was involved in it knew all of what I'm telling you? They didn't. How did they get so lucky? Even some of the names that are mentioned in the Tucson Led Crosses, and I don't want to hear that garbage about, well, they could have had access to this university and that university. Those kind of statements come from people who don't go to universities to try to research something. I've spent weeks researching one single topic and found one single answer. So I know what it takes to go to the university and search something out. It isn't anything like the internet. You know exactly what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yep, before the internet, research was tough.
Oh, I forgot to mention, Egyptians never left their homeland. If there's anything on this continent that looks Egyptian or clearly looks of Egyptian origin, I can guarantee you it's from Hebrew origins. Egyptians never left the comfort of their front porch. They were very cunning people, but they were not explorers. They didn't go anywhere.
You don't think they hopped on a ship with the Phoenicians and sailed and...
No. In fact, the only Egyptian I've ever read about who was on a boat, okay, not saying there wasn't others,
Yeah.
was the woman who was given credit, and of course the academics will jump on board and, you know, because it comes from a source that once you mention it, everybody starts going on about how they made it up. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that. I give credibility where credibility is due, and I'll continue to do so unless I find a reason not to. I just want truth. But I believe that Egypt was discovered, the land of Egypt was discovered by a woman who was in her boat. And how do you find a land if it's covered with water? Now, academics, geologists, archaeologists, they don't want to go here. I seen the programs back in the 70s and the 80s, and no, I haven't forgotten them. They knew that the pyramids were underwater. They knew that the Sphinx was underwater. You look at all those cities that are out there in the Mediterranean that are underwater. When were they above water? Of course, their only excuse is, you know, back when this giant volcano that we don't know where it was, but when it went off, you know, Crete, the island of Crete, sunk and the cities sunk and everything. None of that happened. Those cities were above water, but it was prior to a pole shift, when the waters were being pulled 600 miles off the coast of Alaska, which made the water levels in the Mediterranean much lower. Then we had another pole shift, and those ocean levels came back up. That was for, you know, how many cities can you build in 2,700 years?
A lot, yeah.
Quite a few. But hey, you know, some of this comes from Scripture, people. Truth is where you find it. And when you find someone lashing out against it, it just draws my attention to it even more. I want to know, what is it about this that bothers you so much? Well, if you keep looking into it, you'll find out why.
Why? Why?
It's because they don't want you to know the truth behind it. I've never understood what's the big deal. Who gives a damn who first came to America? Who gives a damn?
What's the big deal?
You know, why do we have to create this stupid land bridge theory? You know, come on. I'm not buying it. All right? And they always take God out of the equation. Well, if you're going to take God out of the equation, you got to come up with some extraordinary story. I was watching a video of yours, I think, the other day, talking about the petroglyphs over in Nevada. You know, the oldest petroglyphs on the continent are 10,000 BC. They were probably created at the earliest 3,500 years ago, maybe. They were underwater too at one time, and I don't mean the big flood. Lake Lahontan, you know, that glacial lake, like Lake Bonneville, that glacial lake.
So you're saying, let me see if I get this
No,
right.
I
You're
said
saying-
nothing of the sort.
Well, I'm going to pin it down here. You're saying Lake Kapala
You're going to pin me down on this, aren't you?
was Bonneville? Is that what you're saying?
No. Lake Bonneville is an entirely different lake than Lake Kapala. Lake Kapala was in the basin. Lake Bonneville was over in Utah County, Salt Lake, Box Elder, yes. Clear down to Cedar City, okay? I have 2 KMZ files, which I told you about from time to time, and I still haven't sent them to you, where I meticulously overlaid 30-minute maps around the entire perimeter and throughout the islands in Lake Bonneville, just so I could see where the shorelines are. And I won't go into the reasons why. But I also did the same thing with Lake Kapala. And we went out and field checked a few of the places out there, and sure enough, you can see the rippled sand, the shoreline. And so we know that it was pretty much at 6,000 feet. Even if the land out there has tipped or what have you, it's still going to produce pretty much the same shape or close to it. And when you look at those old Spanish maps, anywhere from, the 14th century up to the 16th century, it makes you wonder, why are these guys copying each other's maps? Because it's the same shape. The one that blew me away was the French map. The French and the Spanish haven't really gotten along, especially in the past, but somehow they managed up with the same basic shape on their maps. And I think the reason that is such an icon for them to be looking for is because it has something to do with the story of King Hiram.
So, King Solomon, you're saying that King Solomon's mines was in the Uinta Basin area, Utah.
No, I didn't say that. But I will say that I believe that King Solomon's mine, referring to the one that King Hiram was going to, is more than likely in the Uinta Mountains. In fact, a few years ago, I believe I found that particular location. It's referred to on the old Spanish maps that have surfaced as Mina del Rey. You go type Mina del Rey into any Google search window or whatever browser you're using, and it always takes you to King Solomon's mine. See, Mina del Rey, it's not king's as in more than one, king's mine. It's mine of the king. Okay? What king? King Philip? No. King Louis? No. Who is it that could be referred to as the king? Sure, we could be talking about Jesus Christ, but I don't think he's involved in this part of this. I think it goes back to the very reason why they're all coming here and what they're looking for, this focal point. And I think it's King Solomon. I mean, think about it. It was in those days, and you could, in the same way, you could blame it on King David, because King David is the one that the promise was made to, that this great king would come from his lineage. And so when this Christ was born, by the time if you went from King David or King Solomon all the way up to the time of Christ, you got 900 years. And you know how many branches of royal families there would be at that point? Now you begin to understand why some of them just wasn't buying into this. No, this can't be the king. It didn't come through my lineage. That's how proud they were. And there was a lot of them that they knew the truth. But it's those royal families, and there were hundreds of them, that this information was passed down through. And I think that's the king that's referred to in Mina del Rey, is King Solomon's mine. It may not make any sense to some people, but to me it does.
So, I've heard stories that there's pyramids in the Uintas that are covered up. I've heard stories that there are columns with columns carved out of the cliffs in remote areas in the Uintas with rooms going back into the cliffs. You hear stories of these fabulous rich gold that's come out of the Uintas, but you never hear of anybody actually taking pictures of them, seeing it. What's your thoughts on all this?
I can't say that I don't believe that there may be pyramids up here in the north, because I think in a couple of places there just might be. As far as the Uintas go and pyramids like what you find in Egypt, seriously doubt it. It wouldn't surprise me, but I doubt it. Okay? I just haven't found anywhere in the histories that I've researched over the years wherein that kind of a structure might exist. Now, you might find smaller pyramids similar to what you find in the Yucatan, like, you know, Chichen Itza, Uxmal. I believe we might have some things like that. In fact, one of the sites that I believe in is about 3 miles from here. I don't know how long it's going to take for me to be able to get the equipment. That's the one thing that always stops us, is we just don't have the financial support to continue the research. I can get on the computer any day of the week, but I can't finalize any of it because I just don't have what I used to have. One of these days we'll have to do a video on why. Temples, columns, things like that, I'd have to say I believe they exist, okay? And I have a good idea of who might have done it, and I think it's going to take you back to the days of the Indo-Greeks. There's 2 places in the Uintas which were once pretty much the foothills, if even that today are much further up into the mountains, because the mountains have rose up even more so. Read the account that's in the Tucson Led Crosses. They mentioned something that about, I think they were talking about the city of Rhoda, and that the city was rung with hills. And this was after the quake. So it was a pretty massive earthquake, primarily by the Paiute description. But anyway, so yeah, I think I think it's possible.
So you're thinking that because of the massive earthquakes, these mines of Solomon, fabulous rich gold out of the Uintas has been covered up, hidden up because of the earthquakes.
Well, yes. For example, what I believe could be King Solomon's mine, or more so King Hiram's mine, it could be the very same mine. The problem is that territory up there, that land, has had its butt kicked several times since Hiram was here. So is it the same location? Could be, but I don't think it looks anything like it did in the days of Hiram. Nothing. Who knows? Maybe they had some way of relocating it, even after such horrific events. As a result of these events and covering up cities, destroying cities and so forth, when we get done here, let's go for about a 5-minute drive.
Okay.
I'll show you something. If nothing more, it's going to leave you scratching your head. I'd been here for 7 years before I noticed it.
Well, there's an interesting thing here that I thought happened because of a glacier, and you're telling me there was never a glacier in this valley.
I've avoided saying this on camera. In order to have a last ice age, you had to have a first one. And there has never been an ice age. There was an event that occurred in approximately 2700 BC which caused an instant freeze in the north and south. And that has been slowly melting off ever since, and today gives the illusion of global warming. If you pay attention to these pole shifts that geologists and others of the academic world don't want to acknowledge, once again, what's the big deal? Who gives a damn if there was a continuous North Pole where it's at today since the beginning of time 3.5 billion years ago, or if there's been pole shifts from time to time? Who cares? Why do they fight against it?
I gotta agree with you.
I don't get it. The evidence is so strong, it's ridiculous. I wish that I could remember the man's name. He was, if I recall, an anthropologist and a geologist. Okay, he did a lot of studies up in Alaska. One of his best documents I've ever read is called Frozen Muck. So you might be able to find it with just that. And no one said boo about him. No one contended against him until the day he died. And now they're coming up with all kinds of things that, discredits him. You're familiar with that famous cave down in New Mexico where they found the sloths and the horses, I think. And anyway, they turned that into a big scandal and used it to discredit him.
When he wasn't around to fight and tell them.
Exactly. But you know what? They can discredit all they want, because you can still go up to Alaska and still witness and see all the things he wrote about. Something happened up in Alaska that, number one, caused an instant freeze. Okay? You don't find bluebells in the mouth of a mammoth who was slowly frozen. Okay? Second, where'd the bluebells come from? Let me guess, he walked down the California coast, we got Canada there, so he had to go clear down through Canada, down into California and find some bluebells, and then walk his rather large butt, all the way back up to Alaska and keep those bluebells in his mouth? Where'd the bluebells come from? They don't grow in snow, I'm sorry. And what happened that tore these animals to pieces?
I didn't know they was torn to pieces, but you can find what happened.
One of these days, you and I will sit down and I'll show you some things regarding that very event that'll just knock your socks off. That's not something I'm gonna.
Okay. So, because that's a big claim that there was never ever an ice age. I know that. This is the first time I've ever heard.
I'm not saying that the North wasn't frozen. I'm not saying the South wasn't frozen.
But you're saying it was an instant freeze. I mean, glaciers move.
I know how ridiculous it sounds, but to me, it's no more ridiculous than the story they're telling now. Okay, but once you've seen the details, and you've heard the evidences, and you understand how it happened, it makes perfect sense. I really don't. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I don't have to prove it. All I have to do is fall back on other people's research. What was that guy's name that was really big into pole shifts? Charles Hapgood. I mean, he'd come out and was telling everybody, "Hey, we had pole shifts." He even showed us where the previous poles were. Okay. Well, man, his peers, his colleagues, everybody's freaking out. Oh, we can't have that. And so he went and toned it down into polar wandering. If you ever want to know where polar wandering came from, it was a toning down of pole shift, sudden pole shift. The evidence is fantastic. It's everywhere. You're going to drive through two of those evidences on your way home. Of course, these mountains popped up over millions of years. Billions. It's amazing what people buy into. In an effort to keep from saying things I don't want to, we'll stop right there on that one.
Okay.
Because I know you won't cut it out.
See, man,
Huh?
I tell these guys, man, you are one heck of a researcher, and not just in. I mean, you're well versed in a lot of different things. The Native Americans, the ancients, the lore and history of lost mines, buried treasures. You're a well-rounded researcher.
Let me give credit where credit's due, okay? I think the only thing I could even come close to patting myself on the back for, and I can't even do that because I know where my talent comes from, okay? Yeah, I just listened a little bit. But I got to give credit to the people who has already done the research, who have already written about it, who's already proven it. I'm just the guy that went out and found it and said, wait a minute, this piece fits right here. How can you deny it? This piece fits here. Wait a minute. Why did he say that? You know, the academics are saying that he meant this, and I'm saying, no, he didn't. He meant what he said, and he said what he meant. That's all I could even slightly take credit for, is being able to put together the evidences, the research that's already been done. And just thank all the people that put thousands of these books on the internet free for download. Oh boy, I took advantage of it.
So with that said, you have taken some of all this information that you've gathered and put it together in your own books. Explain it.
Yeah, yes, I have. And I've had maybe one person who's read my books who's mentioned, well, the only thing I don't like is you don't have, in the back of the book, you don't have this bibliography. What do I need that for? I tell you where it came from every time I make a statement. And if I don't know where I got it from, I tell you, I don't know where I got it from.
So this is something that as they're reading, they can highlight it, go through it, double check where you're getting this information, and see if it jives what you're telling them.
And if I failed to write where that information come from, which anybody can make mistakes, but I just can't see me making that mistake, because when I write something, I read it back to myself several times over. And I ask myself, if I read that, what would I think? I think first question would come to my mind would be, where in the hell did that come from? Well, I'm gonna put it there. I'm gonna say, this is what so-and-so said, and here's where you'll find it. I don't always know where to find it. I don't always remember who said it, but I'll tell you that. To me, that's the best practice you can get into. There's nothing I hate worse than reading through a whole book and then thinking, okay, now what was it I wanted to go check? Or, oh, wait, there's a footnote here, so I got to, put my bookmark in, close the book, go back to the back of the book and find the footnote, find out who wrote it, and just to go over to Wiki and find out that it's some guy quoting a guy who wrote a book 5 years before him. That's old. That's frustrating. I'm sorry. That's just, to me, that's not evidence. Quote the original source, not the bastardized version.
And I happened to buy a copy from you of your all the books that you have, and I'm sure that's been.
You haven't got all of them.
I was going to say that's probably been 8-10 years ago, so you probably tripled that by now.
How many you got?
I don't know. I haven't had time to even go through them, but all the books that you have to research, are you willing to sell so somebody could go through that, your book list?
Well,
your books on
yeah.
That, so that they have them right there. They can go through and read all the books that you've gone through.
Yeah, I do. I actually, I used to just give that stuff away, but back to that video that we need to do one of these days as to why I can't do that anymore. I'll bet he's nervous. Did I just say that?
No.
Okay. I do make the research available to people, and very rarely do I get somebody that says, hey, I want a complete copy. I don't care where it came from, because it's going to cost you just as much to get 1,000 books or get the whole set, 3,000 books. Oh, these are religious books? Oh, well, you can leave those out. I've never had anybody do that. But because you have to consider those books. You do. You got to consider all of them. Some of the best histories this nation's got is in religious books. Some of the best histories this world has is in religious books. So yeah, I do make those available. As far as my own personal books, you probably don't even know about it yet. I don't know, but I just finished a 3-volume set of Toscoro.com's articles.
Oh man, because you got a great...
That's 5 years worth of writing. But what I had to do is I had to go first take all the information off the internet, because I know the internet's going down one of these days, and I know how vulnerable it is. And after writing all them articles, I don't want to see it disappear, because I don't want to go find where I wrote it in my computer. Those kind of files don't get treated very well.
Yeah.
So I went and copied all the articles, took them off, and put them in books.
Cool.
Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. Very few articles that have recently been written didn't make it into the book. And I'm winding down. I'm tired of writing the articles, and I mean, I love doing it, but sometimes I feel like I'm talking to the wind. I really do. I don't know what to do at this point. I've done as much as I can on this end. I just wish I could go back 16 years and pick up where I left off then. I just don't see it happening. There's a lot of things out there to be done, so I'm starting to farm them out.
As in projects that you've researched, both dealing with the treasures, the mines, the ancient locations of ancient cities.
Things that I've accidentally found.
Like the Egyptian and the Grand Canyon, for instance. Only things that people don't know about, different other than that.
Okay. I admit it, from time to time, I watch Ancient Aliens. Do you know why?
Why?
Because there's a lot of truths within, and they very quickly twist it all up and bastardize it. Okay? But occasionally they come across some good stuff, all right? I was watching it, I think yesterday, and they were talking about the cave that Kincaid found. And I thought, oh, this is going to be good. So I kick back and I start listening to him. And you know what? They actually didn't hammer on the Egyptian thing. I knew it was coming, but they didn't. They actually mentioned it the way Kincaid put it, that, it was Egyptian-like or Egyptian-looking items, but likely Oriental. Okay, I couldn't believe it. Blew me away. But I couldn't help but sit there and think, God, I ought to call these guys up and go show them where the cave is. But why?
You know where the cave is?
I know exactly where it is. And I'll bet you that if we had the right gear, and I'm talking, what do you call them, high-powered spotting scope, okay? I'll bet you we can find it. Because I know exactly where the tram was that was built over the top of the entrance to lower the man down, and when they get above the cave, then they lower that down and they enter. They didn't have to go scale the wall. That tram was removed in 1954. It took them, when was it found? 1909?
7, 9, something like that.
It took them damn near 40 years to get everything that they could out. Which is the reports that I got, that everything that could be removed was taken out. They can't remove the paintings on the walls. They can't remove the statues that are carved right out of the cave walls and the pillars and whatever. The front of that, the entrance, prior to this massive flood from 900 AD, it used to have a facade on it, a front, very much like that city over in Jordan.
Petra?
I don't know what it's called. All I remember is the Temple of Doom.
Petra.
Yeah, it had an entrance very similar to that. I mean, what would you do if you were out hiking and you come across something like that? I mean, it's over there.
Be amazing.
Why can't it be here? Why can't there be underground cities here?
Well, because they're just a bunch of dumb Indians here, man, that had no...
Exactly, that's what they portray. We had a bunch of dumb Indians who were smart enough to come across the land bridge that didn't exist, in an ice age that didn't exist, and somehow managed to come over here and figure all this out. I don't know. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. And I could very easily be wrong. I get it. I know. You want to go for a drive?
Yeah, let's go for a drive. And so with that said, Ben, I guess that's a wrap.